this morning. We are honoured to have a special guest who has come all the way from the UK to be with us. Our special guest today is Al-Sheikh Muhammad Umar ibn Ramadan. He is the chairman of the Ramadan Foundation in the UK. He is a senior member of Majlis Al-Shura of Markaz Jama'at Ahl Sunnah in the UK and overseas, an organisation that was established in 1979. Sheikh, Brother Muhammad, welcome to the Voice of Islam. Jazakumullah khair for being with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for your kind.
Our listeners know that the Voice of Islam is the leading radio station in including visiting scholars, visiting imams, and anybody who wishes to serve the community, especially people who have a long history of serving the community overseas. And being in the UK, that is a country that has faced many challenges that may well be paralleled in Australia, or maybe in some extent even greater challenges that what the Muslim community is facing in Australia. We would like to explore some of these challenges with you a little bit later in the program, inshallah. But firstly, just so that our listeners are better informed about this trip, how long are you planning to stay in Australia?
I came basically about 45 days ago. Well, longer than about 7 days, I think it's been. It's been so long I can't remember when I came.
It's been that boring that it
yeah.
feels like forever. Well, inshallah, it'll pick up in the next few days with the engagements that you will have within the Muslim community.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of programs, a lot of speeches. I gave the Jummah at Masjid Imam Ali Ibn Abi Talib in Lakiba, and many lectures every evening. And alhamdulillah, it's been a fantastic show. I want to thank specifically Islamic Help, Professor Izzuddin and Abdul Jabbar, and all the organisers, all the masajids that have helped to bring me here. And it's my first time, and I have to say for sure, it's a beautiful country, and it's and the Muslim work here is amazing, really amazing. And I pray Allah will protect you from every tribulation.
Thank
inshallah.
You too, inshallah. And of course, a great big thanks to the Islamic Help, to Professor Izzuddin and to Brother Abu Ibrahim, Brother Abdul Jabbar. It is great when we see a very active Islamic charity, in fact one of the most transparent Islamic charities in Australia, bringing speakers to Australia to actually keep the Islamic spirit alive and to help members of the Muslim community engage with Muslims from abroad, to talk about the issues that confront us all as Muslims. We are brothers and sisters regardless of which country we come from, and our concerns are the concerns of our brothers in other countries, and their concerns are our concerns as well. Sheikh Muhammad, what is the purpose of your visit to Australia?
The purpose of my visit here is just to learn, to specifically give da'wah to Muslims here, because we have something in common, that both of us are a minority community in a Western country, if you want to call it non-Muslim country. We are a bit older in the UK, alhamdulillah, that our forefathers came to the UK in the 50s and the 60s. We're more established in that sense, but it's good to learn from each other, to look at what we did right and what we did wrong, to share that with you here, and to look at the community here and how the Muslims are very effectively building your institutions. I was really, really impressed by your what we call your care homes, which is it's an unfortunate thing, but it's also a fortunate thing too, that due to certain realities we have to now cater for elderly care, because children unfortunately aren't looking after the elders, and there may be other valid reasons, because of medical reasons they're unable to care for certain people. So it's about coming here, learning, interacting with people, sitting with people, specifically the ulama. And I'm really amazed how you've kept your culture, i.e. the Lebanese community or the Pakistani community, but you've been able to integrate it in this country, and that's something which is a must for Muslims wherever we are, to be an integral part of society.
As you know, and you can give us many lectures on this topic, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that one of the leading purposes of our diversity as a human family is to get to learn from each other, to know each other, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, لِتَعَارَفُوا. So
Yeah.
that you can get to learn from each other, because the human experience differs depending on where you are in the world and the challenges that you face. And it is when you bring the fruit of all that experience together, the successes, the lessons you've learned from the failures, and then you pass them on. Humanity is vastly enriched by that. And for all those people who call for assimilation, they don't understand what they risk to lose if we don't retain the better aspects of our original cultures. Every culture has something to contribute to enrich a host culture. And
Definitely.
the most obvious example is in Australia, that in many countries that have embraced multiculturalism, they've become incredibly enriched by that experience. And of course, as you say, to become an integral member of society, because Muslims, as Muslims, we're supposed to contribute to every society that we live in. We're not meant to be stagnant, sitting on a shelf and looking for handouts, but we're meant to be active members. We're meant to be striving to become pioneers in whatever field that we take. As our Prophet ﷺ said, that Allah loves to see that if you take on a task, that you become proficient at it.
Yes, definitely.
That you take it to the level of perfection, if you can. That the level of ihsan in what you do. You must have seen, Imam, that although the Muslim community has achieved a few things, especially in the form of buildings, we have
Yes.
accomplished buildings. We have a few big mosques. We have a few big schools. We have some Islamic centres. But what I see, and I don't know if it's a different experience in the UK, is that the more we establish, the more we become divided. Now, you mentioned in your your intro about what you've seen in Australia. You've mentioned the nursing homes, and my biggest fear when we started to look at establishing nursing
Yeah.
homes is that this will give the excuse to many people to offload their parents to somebody
Abandon
else.
them, yes.
Abandon them when they get older. This is a nation that has a history of working 9 to 5.
Yes.
And in recent times, putting in extra hours, especially if you're in executive positions, and 2 people working, and long daycare. So the child is abandoned to the hands of long daycare, and you don't have time for the parents because you're busy running after the fruits of this world. And of course, on the other hand, when you're not looking after those who raised you, you are missing on so many blessings.
Definitely.
And we haven't really, as we will build those buildings and talk about people who've abandoned their parents, using that as an excuse to invest into these projects, we as a community have not done enough to emphasise the importance of caring for parents. Now, have you experienced that in the UK, and have you attempted to treat this particular phenomena?
I mean, one of the unique things about the United Kingdom that we have as Muslims is we have a culture, Pakistani or whatever culture we have. Predominantly the Muslims in the UK are from Pakistan, Indo subcontinent. So we have a culture where, it doesn't matter whatever happens, we look after our parents. But we are seeing a norm now where parents are being abandoned by kids, parents are being left by themselves. In many places, parents are not being, there's no interaction, there's no way, where people are looking after them. And that is a tribulation at one time. And it has to be dealt with. The ulama have to deal with it in a very balanced way. So we shouldn't really be anti-care home. We have to have a balance in the sense of saying that those that have the ability should do it. But then there are circumstances which are extreme, that they need 24-hour care, that it's impossible for family members to care, and they should do that. But we have to keep. It's an extremely difficult thing to say, and I think you've actually answered it in the sense that there's more blessings than the tribulations. It is extremely hard, but the blessings are amazing. I mean, money comes, money goes, but that fortunate time with your parents, looking after your mother, looking after your elderly father, you will never get an opportunity again. You will never get an opportunity again. And it's something which will destroy the Muslim community. If the Muslims begin to And this is one of the assimilations that I'm against in the Western world. So we do believe in assimilation. We do believe in interaction with integration is the word I'm looking for,
but not assimilation.
But not assimilation. But this form of integration I'm against, which is following a non-Muslim view of just kick your parents out and let them go to the old folks. So,
and visit them on special occasions.
Wallahi, there's great blessings of having them in your house.
I mean, the people don't realise, if they remember, when they look into an elderly, infirm parent, when they look into their face and they realise that they are the person who brought a smile onto that face.
Subhanallah.
I mean, that is a very enriching and rewarding experience. You feel,
and she's the mother who woke up at night.
That's right.
She had to wake up. She had no choice.
That's right.
To change your nappies.
That's right.
Care for you when you were crying. And now it comes to that. You don't have to do the same.
Yeah.
But just sit with them. I mean, how many times I said to people, and I said this to my students, and when I'm an imam, is how many times do you just sit and speak to your parents?
Yeah.
Have a conversation. And one of the signs that the Prophet ﷺ said, which Al-Bayhaqi narrated, and Ibn Abi Shaybah, that one of the signs at the end of time is that we will have children that will be extremely angry. And everyone's angry now.
Yes.
No one has sabr, patience, either with a child, with your wives, with other people. And this is the signs of the end of time, and an unfortunate thing.
And it is what I've described it in one of my poems as the pursuit of quick stimulation. They want to be stimulated in something that is interesting, but not long.
Yes.
Everything like a brief burst of stimulation, and then move on to something else. You see, it is so evident. Initially, we used to talk about news clips. When you watch the news, most stories are about 30 seconds long because they know that they can't really capture the attention of the viewer for longer than that, and they then jump to another story. If it's a really big, significant matter that they know that people are captive to that matter, it might go as long as 2 minutes.
Yes.
Rarely does it go beyond 2 minutes because people have been conditioned to that. Now, if you look at what people view perhaps the most, YouTube, for example, many of the popular clips are very short as well.
Yeah.
A few minutes, not much longer. The long, in-depth talks that would elevate you don't get as many clicks anymore, not amongst the younger generation.
Definitely, yeah.
Because people are becoming more and more shallow, and their shallowness now has become the new depth.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, people nowadays, one of the things, I'm a bit of a dictator to them when it comes to this aspect. I really enforce it upon my kids is read a book. Any book. Put your phones down, get any book, whether it's Harry Potter, anything, and just read. We've stopped reading as a people, as a nation. And reading, not only does it opens up your comprehension, it develops your grammar skills, your everything, and it's more intelligent and we just stuck with this mobile.
Well, there are aspects of reading actually. One of the books I read, I don't remember the name of the book anymore, but they describe the difference between reading and viewing. That when you're viewing something, when you're watching a film or a short clip or whatever, you are limited to not only to the imagination of the producer, you're also limited to the technology that was available to the producer.
Yes.
So that's a lot of limitations. But when you're reading, you actually expand your imagination, you expand your intelligence, because then it's your imagination that is creating the scene that is being described in the book. Your imagination becomes broader and vaster, and it makes you more creative. It actually makes you someone who can contribute better to the society. And that is a glaring difference between watching and reading. And if you want to develop your child's skills and abilities and creativity and imagination, then by all, of course. And I was talking to a young lady recently, saying, "Oh, you're reading the book. A movie's come out." I made that comment. A movie's come out, and she said to me, "It's not the same. I have to read the book. It's much." Some children still appreciate, but we need to spread that further because reading actually teaches patience and improves the imagination and improves the creativity. I think many Muslims around Australia start to realise the importance of engagement on a broader level from about the mid-90s, when there were many accusations about crime from within migrant communities, and most of us started to realise that we cannot be a closed community, that we have to be open. And that realisation became far greater after September 11. That before that, there was all this fear that the media will distort, manipulate, present what they wish to present, which they still do. You can't run away from that. But if you work hard enough, you can debunk many of the myth or bits of misinformation that they might portray or broadcast. So I found that the need to engage is just as significant within the Muslim community as it is outside the Muslim communities. And I'm hoping that you can share with us some of your experience in engaging outside with the broader society and then inside, so that our community understands that engagement is dawah, and engagement has to be done wisely.
Yes.
And not always assume that the person you're talking to knows all the givens that you believe, but rather there's a huge gap in the knowledge that they have, and you have to talk to them at their level. So how was your experience with engagement within the Muslim community in the UK to prepare Muslims to be able to talk to non-Muslims in a rational manner?
I mean, one of the fortunate things was myself. I have a lot of media experience, speaking to the BBC, speaking to wider media on Muslim affairs, and I was the youngest person to ever be interviewed on BBC Hard Talk, and this was immediately after the 7th of July terrorist attacks in London, and after that I got a call from Danish media, and this was during the time when you had the Danish cartoons coming out, and what they wanted to do is they had a delegation of media moguls, journalists that wanted to meet me and speak to me and challenge me. So I went to this whole program, and the first thing the gentleman said to me, out of humour, "Oh, I forgot to bring a copy of the cartoon," to instigate a reply from me. But I kept quiet, and we went in the presentation, and I gave a 15 to 20 minute presentation, and then I took one-to-one questions from them, and I debated them in an academic, well-spoken, with adab, respect, courtesy. And they were amazed. And everything they were saying, I was challenging them. No, you're wrong. This is how it should be. And they had never actually experienced that. And it was at the end of the program, wallahi, the man that said to me that I should have bought a copy of the newspaper, then said to everyone at the end that we should really be paying more attention to people like him than other people. Because, that's the real Islam. So if we don't get out and interact with our people, if we don't interact with the larger society, then we only have ourselves to blame. Now, our parents came to the UK for one purpose: money, financial betterment for us. But we are an integral part of a British, Australian, Western society. And we can't look at ourselves as a minority. That is the danger. When you say we are Muslim minorities, or we are a minority, you failed. You have to look at yourselves and say, I am part of this society. I am part of a Western, country, and this is my country. Australia is my country. England's my country. Pakistan, or saying, I presume that you're Lebanese, or there's a massive Lebanese community. Lebanon is Lebanon, but you're Australian. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to question. And you mentioned something uniquely. My brother, you said, لِتَعَرَفُهُ. Yeah. And the scholars have, in akramakum indallahi atqakum, Surah Hujurat.
Yes.
The scholars have said that, what does لِتَعَرَفُهُ mean? What does that mean? They said it is to benefit with knowledge to each other.
Yes.
So you mutually take goodness from people and you leave that. But if the Muslims here do not interact, if the Muslims don't be a positive force of engagement, what will happen is the government will then engage with people who will not have your interest.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you raised that point. Just recently, the Prime Minister invited a number of so-called community leaders, Muslim community leaders, to meet with him, and it was just after he made some very derogatory comments about Muslims. and only some people went. Most of them boycotted, and what I found to be ridiculous in what they did. Look, you're entitled to boycott. No one can force you to go anywhere that you don't want to go. And we're all entitled to be angry with the Prime Minister. And I was perhaps the first person in the community to express my disappointment and
Yes.
and how I was offended by what the Prime Minister said in the media, in the mainstream media. But to actually follow that with a media release that was, for all intents and purposes, nonsensical. It actually gave the Prime Minister exactly what he wanted. He was allowed to appear as a hero in front of the extremists in society, the extremist non-Muslims in the society, the extreme right, and we were on the defensive. And a lot of Muslims could not understand that when our Prophet ﷺ said that the greatest jihad is speaking to power, a word of truth in front of a tyrant. Well, how are you going to get that word of truth to your Prime Minister when he said something that was bad and wrong about you? How are you going to get it to him? He's given you the opportunity to go and look him in the eye and say to him, you're wrong.
Challenge him.
He's given you the opportunity. Why are you afraid of looking him in the eye and saying, you're wrong, Prime Minister, this is what should happen?
Well, when I was flying here, I read a newspaper article on the plane regarding the meeting that the Prime Minister wanted. It's very similar to what our Prime Minister at that time, Tony Blair, did when we had 7th of July. And one of the lessons that we learned was that it's not really good to boycott these political programs or whatever they may be. Prime Ministers, politicians will always be the same. You'll either like them or you'll hate them, but you should engage with them. And one of the unique things about the Quran is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to us and tells us that when He sent Musa and Harun to Fir'aun, Allah said, go to Pharaoh, but speak softly with him.
Well, speak rationally.
Rationally.
So give him the benefit.
And engage with him. And this is something I said to some of my friends from America, called me and said, Sheikh, do you advise us to engage with Donald Trump? Would you advise us to engage with Donald Trump in America? I said, you would be foolish not to. How are you going to challenge his rhetoric and his narrow-mindedness if you're not willing to engage with him? So what I would say to the Muslims is, we don't agree with what your Prime Minister said, but if you're not able to sit with him and have an intellectual discourse with him and just say, I'm going to boycott it, that's quite childish. I think that's really a negative thing. And you said exactly what it is. The extremist wing, who want to divide us, and the right-wing wing, the racist, fascist people who are demonizing Islam and Muslims. We've given them everything on a plate.
And these people end up actually misleading the community, these so-called leaders, because they're leading the community towards cowardice. This meeting is not about violent confrontation. It's about a logical, intellectual confrontation. It's about you going in there and saying, Prime Minister, you were wrong. You know you were wrong. You should not do this. This is what you should be saying. And whatever it is, get your point across.
Yes.
I heard subsequently that some people went in there and made some ridiculous suggestions to the Prime Minister how he can tame the community. And it's like, when you leave that arena to those who aren't going to represent your voice, then you lose out. I mean, one way I try to explain it to people is, when we're angry about an issue and no one will listen, we call for a protest. We march in the streets to bring attention to ourselves. What is the ultimate objective of this protest? Of bringing lots of people, disruption. With all protests are disruptive, even when they're peaceful.
Definitely,
because you disrupt the flow of traffic, you disrupt the businesses, you disrupt your own life because you're taking time out to go on a protest.
Yes.
There's two objectives in a protest. One is to spread awareness to people who may not otherwise know about what your issue is, and the second one is to get, and perhaps the more important one, is to get your point of view across to those in authority.
Definitely.
Now, here's the person with authority in Australia opened his door and said, come in and tell me. And you say, no, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to stand outside and make lots of noise. Well, where's the logic in that? It's as if our community, on occasions, some of the so-called leadership, they switch their brains off. And then they act very childishly, like a child chucking a tantrum, or we say chucking a tantrum in the Australian vernacular, I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK, throwing a tantrum.
Yes.
So you end up having these debates and further divisiveness with the community. Okay, if you were too busy to visit him that day because you had an engagement or you're taking the wife out shopping or whatever it is, that's your own private problem. Don't make the community wear your failure to represent it. And unfortunately, this is a situation that we faced in here. And I'm glad that you are working to educate the community in the UK to be more engaging, to actually stand up and speak truth to power. Speak always truth to power. And you've mentioned, Imam, you've mentioned the engagements with the media, the youngest person to go on Hard Talk. I've seen some of the Hard Talk programs, and I would very strongly recommend to the listeners to pull up that interview. You'll find them, I'm pretty sure you'll find them on YouTube or maybe on the Hard Talk website itself. You'll see that you might, if you watch very carefully these programs, they might ask some hard questions, some very offensive questions sometimes. But what you need to know is that these questions are on the minds of the general public. And asking the question is not the problem. The problem is if the question remains unanswered. Because when the public, when the viewers see that there is an answer to the question, a rational answer presented in a calm and intellectual manner, then you have gotten your point across, you've gotten your dawah across, and hopefully you've won some more people to understand the issues that are of real concern to you. Imam, if you can tell me, you mentioned the cartoon. You mentioned that they brought, that the man, one of the journalists who was asking you questions said that he forgot to bring the cartoon with him. Let's say he brought the cartoon. Let's say that he brought the cartoon. I've seen that cartoon, and I found it offensive. I held it in my hand, and I didn't like it. In fact, as one in the editorial of the newspaper that published it, they said I was holding it the way somebody holds a bad diagnosis, or the way somebody holds a dirty nappy. Holding it itself, when you are getting a message across to the public, look, this drawing hurts me. I'm holding it to tell you it hurts me. Yes, you have a right to draw what you want, but do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to hurt an entire community and deceive yourself? And this is what a lot of people in our community don't want to get their mind around. That I don't know if you, I don't know what happened in the UK when they did this 15-minute film called the Innocence of, was it the Innocence of the Prophet? I think it might have been. We had protests in the streets. A number of people were arrested, and some of them spent a long time in prison, a couple of years in prison out of that protest. Some people were holding placards calling for beheading of people, including a little child, a 5-year-old child. Most of these people had no idea what they were holding. I guarantee it. We have no idea who brought these placards. They may have been brought by non-Muslims and people just picked them up without reading them. We don't know. Yeah. Because there are people who do that. There are non-Muslims who bait us to do something stupid.
But we also have Muslims that do it too.
Yeah, we also have, of course.
We have to be very honest with that. We have stupid Muslims. Radical,
I do not doubt their love for Islam. I do not doubt their love for the Prophet ﷺ. I don't doubt their zeal. But I am heartbroken that our community leaders, instead of times like that, instead of encouraging patience, that they whip up the emotions, and they don't realise that they're doing more damage, more harm, because the more you talk about it in an angry way, the more people are going to keep stirring it up.
Yeah.
So, when that film happened in the UK, what did the community do? Do you remember back then? It was, I think, in 2012, late 2012.
I mean, one of the things that we have a lot of history and experience in dealing with media. 10 years maybe of.
You've got the Muslim Council of Britain as well, which does...
which is one organisation. It does claim to represent all the Muslims, but that's far-fetched. Yeah. One of the things, no one represents the Muslim community. I don't believe that.
Nowhere in the world. Because we're so disunited.
That's the point. And everyone has its own voice. The Muslim community of Muslim Council of Britain gives its view. Ramadan Foundation gives its view, and so forth. But one of the things that we did, was we encouraged Muslims of not turning into extreme behavior to react to react to something which is provoking a Muslim community. Example is when Pope Benedict said those derogatory comments in Germany about the Prophet ﷺ.
Yes.
There was a reaction to that which was wrong and it was good. Now, I wrote an article and I had an interview in the Times, and I said, look, we condemn his comments, but at the same time, we also condemn all forms of violence.
Yes.
We can't condone those. And then I got an email from a non-Muslim who said, I read that article and you have just changed my view of Islam again. I believe Islam was, he said, I believe Islam was a violent, extreme religion, but listening to you as a religious scholar, as an imam, I've turned my views on. So we have to tell our community specifically that yes, you have the right to demonstrate. Yes, you have the right to raise your voices, but you cannot do it in a way which goes against the law of the country. And this is something that we have said in the UK. We have, for example, Asad Shah was murdered in Glasgow a few years ago. And in Scotland Yard, we had a meeting with Scotland Yard. The police officers gave a full briefing of what happened. And this was a man that claimed to be a prophet. He was originally part of the Ahmadiyya movement and then claimed to be a prophet. And somewhat, a young Muslim, a young Pakistani, British-born Muslim, Tanveer, went to Glasgow and killed him under the pretext of defending the honor of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That's actually going against the honor of the Prophet ﷺ. And that is why imams and scholars and communities must instill patience, sabr, and have programs, workshops with the youth of saying that this isn't Islam. And the reason why we behave in this manner, in my view, is because we haven't read his life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the most patient of people in every aspect of his noble and beautiful life. And I really believe people like the Danish cartoons, the innocent movies, whoever they may be, like this, like you've got this lunatic called Tommy Robinson, and I would love to sit with him. I would really just love to sit with him one-to-one, with a cup of tea, and have dialogue with him, not debate, just a dialogue with him, because he doesn't understand Islam.
But Tommy Robinson is now training with the IDF as well
Well, you see, being anti-Muslim now.
Yes.
So forgive me for interrupting. Being anti-Muslim, and you have an imam here,
yes.
Imam Tawheed, I think.
Tawhidi, yes,
yeah.
yes. Well, he's everyone calls him the fake imam. We don't. I mean,
That's your views, but I don't know him.
May well
But
be a plant.
the point is, being anti-Muslim is very lucrative now. It's,
That's right.
You know, if you want, if you come and speak out against Islam, it's lucrative. But what I'm saying is, these people, they just provoke it for what's it called, a personal.
Personal gain, that's right.
Personal gain. There's nothing from it. I mean, these people, they've got money now.
Yes.
They've got this. They've got no integrity. Integrity means everything. You know, condemn extremism, condemn radicalization, but do it in a right manner. You know, we have, for example, in the UK, grooming cases where girls have been groomed by certain people, but that isn't an Islamic issue.
No, it's just personal failure.
Yeah, we have white people that are grooming girls. The moment
Well, actually, just on that grooming point, what a lot of people actually don't look into is the human trafficking. That most of the in fact, the vast majority of human traffickers are people who have absolutely no association with religion. They are not Muslims. They have nothing to do with Islam, and the whole world seems to ignore it. And according to research, there's about 27 million trafficked people. And what trafficked people means is that people who are either deceived into going somewhere and then later kidnapped, or just forced, taken off the streets, and in many cases used as slave labour or used as slaves of another kind.
Sexual exploitation.
That's right. And many of these are young people. Some of them are children.
Yes.
That is ignored, and that criminal activity of grooming children in the UK, just because Muslims are involved, it shines a big spotlight on it. By all means, arrest them, charge them, throw the book at them.
Definitely.
But it is not an Islamic issue. It is a personal crime by those individuals. And this is where the media becomes very unfair, and the politicians milk it. They
Yeah.
milk it for whatever gain they can get.
We were quite fortunate in the UK that the politicians were extremely careful, but the police were very engaging. This was different. Usually it's us and them. The police took the initiative themselves in the UK and said, look, this is not a Muslim issue. And then Greater Manchester Police came out officially and said that there are more white people grooming than Asian or Muslim people. And this is not an issue of race or religion, it's an issue of a crime that's taken place. But we as Muslims, we have to then engage with our community and teach our youngsters about modesty, about haya, and about, and one of the reasons I believe that Muslims go to some extreme is the choices they make in life. We force them to marry people that they don't want to marry. There's many issues, social aspects of it.
We don't seem to have that problem in Australia anymore.
Alhamdulillah.
There was a time when there might have been some influence exerted by the parents, perhaps a few decades ago, but these days... these days it seems that hardly anyone wants to get married.
It's expensive.
It's expensive, and it's expensive in more ways than one. But we have a phenomenon now of many of our sisters and our brothers getting into their late 20s, into their 30s, and they are unwed, and they can't seem to find a suitable partner. One of the challenges that we have now, I've noticed in the UK that you've got a number of Muslim introduction agencies. And
Yes.
there's some all over the internet from different places around the world, and there's even one that promotes having more than one wife. But I've always been against these types of internet introduction agencies.
Right.
What has your experience in the UK? Have you had complaints from people who use them?
Yeah, I mean, as an imam, I get many people that call me for advice on nikah, marriage counselling, marriage problems. Some of the things that some women go through is horrendous. It frightens you that human beings could behave in such a manner. And then I have to intervene and speak to the spouse and say, look, this isn't Islam. Islam honors women. Islam gives a woman, the first, Muslim was Khadija al-Kubra.
Yes.
She was a businesswoman. She was so rich that At-Tabari mentions that when all of the caravans used to come back to Mecca, 80% of the caravans put together were less than hers, were less than what she had. Subhanallah, 80% of everyone's. That is how wealthy. And they said in one narration that the only person that was as rich as Khadija al-Kubra was the ruler, or I don't know, the Kisra of Persia, the Persian emperor. Sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. That is how wealthy she was.
That's his Kisra as well. That's
Yes,
the title.
that's the title. That is how wealthy
Yes.
she was, and she was a Muslim entrepreneur. She was a businesswoman. She was a widow, and she engaged with society. And unfortunately, we don't look towards these things.
But she was not following their pagan rituals. She was not part of their pagan structure.
Definitely. But also another point which is extremely important is these programs, for example, of setting up people. People come to me and say, Imam, I want to get married again. I need to get married. And I say, okay, wait a minute. Why don't you follow the first sunnah? He says, what do you mean? I said, the Messenger of Allah kept his wife for 25 years. Did not marry a second woman. Why don't you follow that sunnah? Why do you always have to follow, pick and choose what type of sunnah you want to?
But
I'm not against getting married more than once. I'm just making...
Look, I'm a proponent of doing it again if you're able to treat them
equally,
and what people don't realise when they talk about this issue is that it's always the woman's choice. She does not have to get into this relationship. She does not have. No woman ever has to marry someone who's already married. But in a society where there's a surplus of women. Massive surplus.
8 to 1, yeah.
These days there's a huge surplus.
Definitely.
What do? But anyway, we shouldn't get too much into this topic because
we're diverting from that.
It's probably the most controversial thing that we've discussed today, and it seems that its greatest opponents in our community are women, even unwed women. So, Imam, we've sort of talked about a number of different areas today. What do you see as the most important challenges that face us as a community in migrant society?
I think the biggest challenge is engagement with the other part of society, being able to sit with them, speak to them, invite them, and preach Islam in your behavior to them. You know, some people have neighbors who are non-Muslims and they've never spoken to them. They've never smiled at all to them, and that is something which we need to change. So, and then we have another problem, which is there's a lot of elderly people in elderly care homes who are non-Muslim people who are lonely, that families don't visit them. So, you know, Muslims should visit them, sit with them, and talk to them, not for da'wah of conversion, just being human beings and be nice. The challenge we have is that we must unite. Muslims must come together. We must put our theological differences to aside, Shia, Wahhabi, whatever, and have some type of dialogue amongst each other. We do have that in the UK, where we do have valid difference of opinion, but Muslims have to come together. We need to sit together and have one voice when it comes to grooming, anti-terror law, anti-terrorism legislation, anti-radicalization programs. Do we take extremism money, anti-radical, you know, and so forth? But another issue that you need to do, which is extremely important, and this is my sincere advice to the Muslims here in Australia, you have to separate international politics to local politics. You can't mix them together. So what's happening in Palestine is wrong. Okay, it's an injustice. But you can't make that the benchmark of everything you do in your country. Because what's going to happen is you're not going to do anything, you'll be protest, and there'll be no engagement. That's extremely important. We're able to switch off. I don't mean to switch off in the sense of
address each issue separately.
Totally separately.
Yeah. I mean, we still address the Palestinian issue, but we don't relate that to our general behaviour, to the anger that we may express from time to time. In fact, we should suppress that anger, because this is what our Prophet ﷺ advised us: suppress that anger, channel it positively. Use that energy to do something constructive and positive. And
but it's a unique hadith of the Prophet when he described, for example, the people with the black flags. Some scholars said this referred to Daesh. And the unique thing I found about this hadith was the Sahaba, after the Prophet told them about this would happen, this would happen, this would happen, there would be vultures, there would be criminals, blah blah. The Sahaba said, what do we do in that circumstance? And look at the advice he gave, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, stay in your houses. He says, if you're standing, sit. If you're sitting, lie down. Meaning, don't engage with fitna. When there's tribulations, the best thing you can do is stay home with your families. So I think the Muslims have to engage, and there's a lot of other stuff that we can do, you know, and alhamdulillah, we pray Allah will protect this Muslim community in Australia, but will make you a positive force, so that people do love Islam by looking at your actions, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair, Imam. Thank you very much for joining us for this program. And just before we close off, what is your next engagement? Do you have any pre-organized speech or talk anywhere during the coming few days?
Yeah, I mean, we've got one is it called Parramatta City? Parramatta, is it called?
Parramatta.
Sorry.
Where in Parramatta?
It's the Musalla there.
Okay,
the main masjid, yeah,
at the main mosque in Parramatta. When is that?
When is it? So Abdul Jabbar will get the details for that. There's a few more programs left. The main programs have happened. I'm just resting a bit, and then on the 6th, inshallah, I'll go to New Zealand for about 45 days, and then back to rainy England, inshallah.
Rainy England. Well, you know, after coming to Australia, I don't know whether you would want to go back with...
Well, your weather is beautiful. It's amazing. It's an amazing country.
Well, the summer officially starts on the 1st of December, so we are officially in summer at the moment. But I think the hottest part of summer usually in Australia is in February, when it really gets hot. Brother Abdul Jabbar, what program? Do you have the program so I can announce it before we conclude? Yeah, brothers and sisters, if you'd like to hear our guest Imam Muhammad Umar ibn Ramadan, his upcoming events are today at 1 p.m. at Greenacre at Fahad College, today at 7:45 p.m. at Liverpool at Al Bayt Al Islami Mosque in Liverpool, tomorrow at 9:45, which I presume just after Isha, at Lakemba, at Risala College in Lakemba. And for some reason I've got the same time for Granville and for Lakemba. So there seems to be a typing mistake. Wednesday, 1 p.m. at Greenacre at Al Nouri College. And Thursday at 12:15 in Mascot at the airport. Oh, that's a flight to Auckland, sorry. When's Parramatta Mosque? I can't find Parramatta Mosque in this program.
Yes, sir.
Sorry?
We have to
I think it's tomorrow, isn't it?
Tomorrow?
I think it's on Thursday. if I'm
Thursday, what
correct.
time?
At Dhuhr time.
Dhuhr time, Thursday at the Parramatta Mosque, inshallah, the Islamic Centre in Parramatta. And after that, Imam flies to New Zealand. You're not coming back to Australia after that, are you?
Inshallah, in the future, maybe, inshallah. It's a
Inshallah,
long
in the
flight.
future.
13 hours is quite long.
Well,
Alhamdulillah.
it is indeed a long flight. And Jazakumullah khair.
Barakallah
Imam,
fikum, thank you.
And may Allah bless you and bless your work. And I hope that you take back some positive impressions to the
Alhamdulillah,
UK. It's been a very interesting conversation this morning. Jazakumullah khair again. And thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dear brothers and sisters, Sister Rania will be with you very shortly while she's on her way.